What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 12 waiver wire ads. This is the final week with buys. You only have to survive one more week. Unfortunately, I have Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen on bye in a league where I only have 4 wide receivers. So I'll be needing to find a fill-in. But if you have anyone on Kansas City, the Cardinals, Chargers, or Vikings, then you are in the same boat as me. There are a few options this week, actually more than I would have thought there'd be in week 12, so we should be fine. We'll take a look at who they are. Remember, I am recording this before the Monday night game, so if anyone gets hurt, check the pinned comment that also has the timestamps. That's where I post any updates, and if you're watching this a few minutes after it's released, the timestamps are in the description. So let's start things off like we have over the last month with Derrius Guice. Guice outsnapped Peterson 20-17, was outtouched by Peterson 8-11, but then outproduced him by 39 total yards, although it was aided by the 45-yard receiving touchdown, and Peterson did not score. Like I've been saying, we cannot know exactly how much they want to use Guice to end the season. My take is that they're slowly going to shift more and more usage towards him as the season comes to a close, because they've barely seen him play since drafting him last year, and they might or might not want to build their roster around him for next year. But they're going to have to figure that out, and so it's going to help that decision-making process if they see him get more touches moving forward. And it's not like giving these touches to Peterson helps them make that decision. So I do think he should be owned in all leagues, not the 45% that he is. Jonathan Williams is the top running back ad this week. Marlon Mack was about to have a monster game, but then he broke his hand, and he's already been declared out for week 12, and it could be several weeks beyond that. Wilkins is usually the backup, but he was inactive after an ankle injury held him out all of last week. As of right now, we cannot know if Wilkins will practice this week and play, but it's a short week. They play on Thursday night, so it's possible they're without Wilkins again. Williams looked great in place of Mack, so you have to think they'd stick with him for this Thursday night game. He carried the ball 13 times for 116 yards and a score, and added a 31-yard reception. Hines also scored, but he only had 3 carries and 3 receptions, and that's something that I warned you about this offseason. He wasn't a guy I liked late because his role wasn't going to change all that much if Mack went down, and we just saw it play out. So while it's possible he gets a few more snaps, we should not expect his workload to be all that different. But Williams, of course, is the top running back claim this week. The Colts have a great offensive line. It's a really good offense. So even at Houston, that's not a great matchup, but he needs to be owned because he's starting running back in the NFL on a pretty good team. I'll mention J.D. McKissic, although he showed this week why I didn't really think he was all that great of an ad. I didn't really know why people were going out and really trying to get him in leagues. He'll just never be a guy who's going to be the early down back. I mean, they brought in Bo Scarborough and gave him more touches than McKissic. McKissic is not an early down running back. He is purely a receiving back. So if you are in a full PPR league and you need someone that is just viable in the flex, he's fine to add. But I really would not want to be starting him. That's really it for running backs. I just make Williams a priority, with Guice being like a consolation prize, I guess, if you were to miss out on Williams. At wide receiver, we've got a few solid options. We'll start off with Randall Cobb. I mentioned him last week, but not as a claim, more as an ad, but I will be moving him up to a claim this week. This was his 3rd straight week with 7 or more targets, and his 2nd consecutive week with 100 yards and a score. Dak is playing just out of his mind recently, and really on the whole season, he's been phenomenal, and the only thing that's holding this offense back is their play calling. They do face the Pats this week and then the Bills after that, so don't expect Cobb to keep going out and posting 100 and a score every week, but those are also more difficult matchups for outside wide receivers, and we know that Gilmore's not going to be on Cobb because Cobb's not the top receiver on Dallas. So he should still have a nice game. I'd also be going after Deebo Samuel. He has back-to-back games with 10 or more targets, has 8 receptions and over 110 yards in each. While some of that has to do with Emmanuel Sanders' injury, he's locked in above Dante Pettis on the depth chart. So while he won't have this sort of ceiling when both Sanders and Kittle are healthy, he's still going to be out there on every snap, and he's definitely earned a role in this offense. I understand you just not wanting to have players in the receiving game on this team because of how much they spread the ball around and how run heavy they prefer to go. But he's a really good wide receiver, and if Emmanuel is still dinged up and if Kittle is still out, I mean, you can start this guy in the flex. So I think he's a pretty good ad, and I feel like I talk about DeVante Parker every week, and then no one adds him. I mean, he's still less than 45% owned, despite being the only real threat left on that offense, while being on pace for 71 receptions, almost 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns, ranking ahead of Juju, Tyler Boyd, Kirk, Odell, Curtis Samuel, Crowder, Fitz, and McLaurin in half PPR. He has more fantasy points than every player I just mentioned, and he's got 5 fewer fantasy points on the season than Allen Robinson. If all of that isn't enough, then consider that he ends the season facing Cleveland, Philly, the Jets, the Giants, and the Bengals. There's a real chance that he finishes inside the top 17 wide receivers this season, and he's available in more than 50% of leagues because everyone hates him. You should also be looking at our boy N'Keal Harry. Unfortunately, Dorsett suffered a concussion this week, and while he could return next week, and hopefully he does, it's possible that he's not cleared in time to play. Harry was active for the first time all season this week, playing 32 snaps, running a route on 20 of them, and seeing 4 targets on those 20 routes. This was his first game back from the IR, so it's not shocking to see him play a limited amount of snaps. But if Dorsett misses, then he could see closer to 40 to 45% of snaps next week, which could raise his targets to 5 or 6. Again, nothing really that crazy yet, but he's an extremely talented wide receiver, and they need an outside receiver, and they need a red zone threat. So I'd look to get him on your team if you have the room. That's it for wide receiver. Let's move on to tight end. Ryan Griffin is just the definition of volatile. He keeps showing the upside that the tight end role has in the Jets offense. And with the current state of the tight end position just being so bad, and with a few key guys going on bye this week, he's actually viable in 12-team leagues as a streamer. There are definitely other guys I'd rather have, but he's not the worst option if you need someone. Ross Dwelley scored twice, and he was a great streaming option last week because of the matchup. Again, if you're a tight end playing Arizona, you're a streaming option. But Kittle is going to be back soon, and he doesn't get to face the Cardinals every week. So I personally would leave him on free agency or move on streaming someone else if you streamed him this week. But if you do really like him and Kittle's out again, he is an option. I mentioned Dallas Goedert every week, but somehow he just never gets above 30% owned. And he has between 4 and 8 targets in each of the last 4 weeks with 3 touchdowns in that stretch. He also gets Seattle and Miami up next, which are both great matchups for tight ends. So he's still a guy that needs to be owned in more leagues than he is. The Broncos are clearly trying to get Noah Fant more involved. He had 11 targets last week coming off their bye, and they definitely looked like they were trying to scheme looks towards him. This wasn't a situation where all of these were dump-offs. It just happened to all go towards him. They were scheming him looks, and a lot of those came close to the end zone. Remember that he's still a rookie, so there are going to be ups and downs in his production, but it does look like they want to get him more involved as the season comes to a close. I hope you already added Jacob Hollister and just have him on your bench, but he's only 14% owned, so I know that's not true for all of you. He's been used a ton as a receiving tight end for Seattle, and he's got a real role in the red zone. With how many tight ends either stink, are hurt, or on bye, I don't understand how he's only 14% owned, but take advantage of that because he's got receiving skills, and Seattle is comfortable using him in that way, and Wilson clearly looks comfortable throwing him the ball wherever they are on the field, and I'd want him more than any other tight end I mentioned before this. The last guy I'll mention is Gronk. This video comes out 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, and he's making an announcement at 9 a.m., so just an hour after this comes out. Just make sure you check what the announcement is, because if he's coming back, you're probably going to want to put a claim in for him. I added him Sunday morning just in case this was the announcement, and I just beat claims. So I'm hoping he's back. I don't know that's what it's going to be, but just see what he says. Let's move on to streamers, and the top quarterback option this week is Derek Carr. The Raiders have been low-key pretty good on offense recently, and we all know how terrible the Jets defense is, so he should have a really nice game. You can look on the other side of this game and just stream Sam Darnold as well. I don't think the over-under's come out yet, but I expect it to be close to 50. I don't know what it's going to be, but with both teams' defense kind of skewing teams more towards the pass. The Raiders have a pass funnel, Jets have a pass funnel. We could see a lot of passing plays in this game, which could lead to a shootout. Sam has back-to-back games with at least 20 fantasy points, including 4 touchdowns last week. Remember when I said he has a really easy schedule to end the season? Well, we're here. So you could honestly just pick him up this week and use him as a streamer each of the next 3 weeks, and you could have done it each of the last 2. Baker has been dropped in a ton of leagues, but he gets a home matchup with the Dolphins, and if there's one thing that can get any quarterback back on track, it's a home matchup with the Dolphins. The last guy I'll talk about is Brissett. The Texans have a fairly mediocre pass defense, and with Mac out, it's possible they're forced to go a little bit more pass heavy. I prefer the names I mentioned above, but if they're gone, then Brissett is an option. For defense streamers, the top streamer in my opinion is the Browns. We all know what happened last week, but they're still a really good defense. And like I said, a home matchup with the Dolphins, that's pretty much as good as you can ask for. It feels odd to say, but the Falcons have been dominant on defense each of the last 2 weeks. They get a home matchup with Jameis Winston next week, so that's always a plus. They have 11 sacks, 4 interceptions, and a touchdown over the last 2 games, which just so happened to be the only 2 games that Dan Quinn hasn't called plays on defense. Funny how that works, isn't it? So if they keep playing as good as they have over the last 2 weeks, then they could be a really good option at home against Jameis. The Broncos are also an option, but not one that I love. They'd really be third on this list behind the 2 I mentioned. They play in Buffalo, which is already a tough place to play in. And while I haven't seen the line yet, it's possible that they end up as road underdogs, which is never ideal as a defense, but they could still have a nice game. And if all of the above are taken, then you can consider Lions at Washington. Washington just can't seem to score an offensive touchdown. They finally scored last week, but I mean, they're just not a good offense. So while the Lions have negative points over this last few weeks, they can still have an okay game against Haskins. So I will order everything for waiver priority, and then we'll be done with the video. So the order for claiming players in is Gronk number 1 if he happens to unretire and it seems like he's going to play in the next few weeks. I'd say that's extremely unlikely to happen, but if it does, know that you should be claiming him. Assuming that doesn't happen though, we've got Jonathan Williams 1, Jacob Hollister 2 if you need a tight end, Derrius Guice 3, then Randall Cobb, Deebo Samuel, and DeVante Parker. The order for adding players is whatever quarterback streamer you need, then the defense streamer you need, then McKissic, any of the tight ends not named Hollister, and then N'Keal Harry last. So that'll do it for the Week 12 waiver wire video. Again, if anything crazy happens in the Monday night game, then just look at the pinned comment for any sort of update. No trade target videos this week because the deadline will be Wednesday, and I don't want to release a video that's only going to be useful for a few hours. So the next two videos you guys will see are the start-sit videos for running back and wide receiver. So be on the lookout for those. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.